It is a new world for us. For all of us. An age of scientific marvels. And yet, underneath the brass and steel, the old struggle endures. The wall dividing life from death. It is so thin. Its protectors so few. But for so few, such terrible strength do we possess.
Console wars claimed yet another casualty. One of the more potentially interesting new IPs announced in the past few years wasted because of a bunch of PR bullshit. Had Sony not been so worried about graphically outdoing Microsoft, this game's mechanics and story could have been a marvel of a new generation, a reason to buy the PS4. This game represents everything wrong with the industry today. Graphics over story and gameplay, QTE-filled cutscenes, which take up about 50% of the 5 to 6 hour overall runtime. Which brings us to the biggest controversy that this game has. It's extremely short. Its QTE-filled non-replayable campaign has the internet up in arms, and now everyone is asking what makes a game worth $60. And while the short campaign is the tip of the proverbial iceberg of issues that the Order has, the question it brings up is one worth asking, and I'm going to attempt to answer it. Hi, I'm Jack Dewitt, and this is Loving the Game. Whether or not a game is worth its asking price is a weighty question. Worth is rather subjective. The differences in personal tastes and types of games make it impossible to definitively say what is or isn't worth your money. So, in order to better examine the cost-benefit relationship between players in any one game, I need to break down this question into several parts. Gameplay, story, content, graphics. These are all things that go into deciding the asking price that a developer/publisher will slap onto their game. Or at least, it should. Unfortunately, more often than not, that isn't the case in the AAA games market. The homogenized $60 price tag that every publisher puts on their games needs to become a thing of the past. But more on that later on in the video. Now, gameplay is what games are all about. So to say that this is the make it or break it when it comes to making a game worth your money would not be an understatement. How much gameplay and what kind of gameplay you want varies between gamers. But I think it's fair to say that quality and diversity seem to be what most gamers are looking for. I should note that diversity does not equal complexity. A game as simple as taking a gun and pointing in the general direction of the Nazi can be fun, so long as the game allows you to kill said Nazi in a way that is even slightly different from his comrade who you killed 2 seconds earlier. Gameplay that fulfills your greatest power fantasies, that gives you massive empires to manage, or that throw you into a huge open world, or hell, make you immersed are all examples of the wide range of experiences that can make a game worth your money. Of course, if the first time you experience a game is just as incredible as the 100th time you experience it, that could definitely raise its overall worth for you. And gameplay that actually works is a definite factor in whether or not a game is worth a consumer's money. Nothing makes a gamer regret their purchase more than not being able to play the game at all. Now, story is the most difficult part to gauge because story is so subjective. The story of a game is so subjective that to put a price tag on it would be kind of impossible. Because while you might love the story of a game, someone else hates it, and because of that, that game isn't worth anything to them. But developers and publishers do still put money behind story. You know, cutscenes, voice actors, and writers all need to get paid. And so it's fair to say that at a minimum, the story of a game needs to engage the players somehow. Because when you put money behind a story like that and the player just doesn't want to deal with the story, wants to skip all your cutscenes, that's a waste of the player's money and of your money, right? And engaging doesn't necessarily mean good either. For example, something like Just Cause 2. I wouldn't necessarily call Just Cause 2's story good, but it's still kind of engaging just because of how stupid it is. Now, gameplay that outshines its story can make a game more worth your money. It just depends on how much effort they put behind the story and how much they shove the story down your throat. Because a game with great gameplay, but a story that sucks, but is consistently shoved down your throat, can ruin the whole experience of a game as a whole. So it just kind of depends on person-to-person, game-to-game basis. This is the part of the video where everyone goes down in the comment section and starts complaining about how graphics shouldn't matter in video games. And while everyone who says that is right, you still end up paying for the graphics in the end, because the company and the developers need to pay to make the graphics. So when you're breaking down what makes a game worth your money, to ignore graphics is stupid. Now, obviously, there are games in which, you know, the overall experience can be worth much more than the graphics will ever be, whether it be through story or gameplay or whatever. Fine. But that doesn't change the simple fact that you end up paying for this. And so you, as a consumer, especially when it comes to a $60 game, have a right to have a certain expectation when it comes to graphics. Especially when it comes to a $60 game. And especially when that $60 game is overhyped with graphic trailers. Like, a lot of people were complaining about how people wouldn't shut up about the Watch Dogs trailers and how they're going to stop complaining about the graphics. You know what? The graphics in Watch Dogs were not that bad. They didn't set the world on fire. They weren't the worst thing to ever happen. But we were given a certain expectation, and we were lied to. And when a lot of people went out and pre-ordered that game, which, you know, don't pre-order games, but that's a different conversation for a different time. A lot of people went out and pre-ordered that game, were expecting the great graphics they got. So when they paid that $60-something when they went on and pre-order it, and they didn't get what they wanted, what they were expecting, they deserve to be angry. They are allowed to be angry. And so, especially in the AAA market, you should have a certain expectation of graphics because they have the money to put behind those graphics, especially when it comes to certain games that are lacking in content in one way or another, or don't have a great story, or especially, you know, if they're lacking in gameplay, then, well, they probably suck. But those kinds of games that charge you $60 in the AAA games industry, you have a right to ask for a certain level of graphical fidelity. Within the indie game industry, or the indie games part of the industry, it's fine to have crappy graphics because we'd rather these indie developers put their money behind story and gameplay over graphics any day of the week. This is kind of the summary. This is the sum of all the parts of a game. This is the overall, when you look at a game, when you look on the back of the case, what you're going to see is the content. And this is the part that's probably going to matter most. This is the part that you're going to ask yourself, is this game worth my money? Because what's worth more money to you? A game that is short and quick, that you play only once, but you'll never forget? Or a game that you're playing for, maybe a year, months, days, who knows, and you have a lot of fun with during that time? You know, is a game that's purely single player more important than a game that's purely multiplayer? Is it important to have a game that includes both and that both are great in their own way? This is kind of what it comes down to when you're trying to purchase your game. This is the last barrier that you look at. Like, even when graphics, a lot of people, don't pay attention to that, because the graphics that they've seen are the graphics that it shows in the case, or the graphics they show in the trailers. So that's not, that for some people doesn't even come into question when they're purchasing a game. And that is where we're at right now. This is the final frontier. This is the last stand you're going to make before you put that $60 down and say, this is what I'm going to do with this money. And a game that's lacking in content, a game that's lacking in one way or another, is going to end up making you regret your purchase. And so when you're looking for a game, you look for a game that's going to fit you. What do you want most? Do you want something to tell you a story? Do you want something to be, you can tell stories from? It's like kind of like multiplayer game. A lot of multiplayer games, the thing that attracts a lot of people to a lot of multiplayer games is the ability to tell stories from their hours and hours and days and weeks of play. This is how you determine whether or not a game is worth your money. A game is overall just a sum of its parts, and to some, one part may be worth more than another. This is how I view it. I'm a story gamer, so a game that tells me a great story, or that gives me the ability to tell a great story, is what I'm looking for when I go purchase a game. A game's narrative, gameplay, graphics, and content need to work hand in hand to give me the experience I'm looking for. Different experiences will require different combinations of these parts, but in the end, they are all equally important and all need to be taken into consideration monetarily. Not only should the consumer consider these parts, but the makers of a game need to consider them as well. Imagine, for a moment, that something like The Order cost about $30 or so instead of $60. The game would have still been a pile of shit, but it would have been a smaller pile of shit compared to the original pile of shit that it is now, because it wouldn't have cost as much. It wouldn't have felt as bad, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It would have been less critically panned, although still critically panned as it deserves to be, and could have even gained a cult following. I mean, a lot of people seem to like this game nonetheless, but the heaviest criticism this game has got is not worth $60. Maybe more people would be willing to like this game if it didn't cost them as much for something they don't deem worthy. But since the AAA market won't adjust their prices to fit their games, it's up to the consumer to use the tools at hand and make a smart purchase. I'm Jack Dewitt, and this was Loving the Game. Thank you for watching.